Hey everybody, let's get this meeting started. I want to welcome our attendees. Make sure I've got this right. Is this my script right here, or is that? Okay. First, we have Dave Henchman. Mr. Henchman is Director of the Information Technology and Cybersecurity Team in the U.S. Government Accountability Office. Wait a minute.
Sorry, you're too low.
Yeah. See, that's what I said. I got out of line. I apologize. At home, I'm used to my wife and daughter telling me when I'm wrong, and Miss Stansberry was supposed to be on me about that, but she didn't. What are you doing?
We'll do that later.
Okay.
Just kidding.
All right. Well, good afternoon. I want to welcome everybody and wish you a very happy tax day, which I'm sure brings a lot of joy into your heart. Today, taxpayers worry if they paid the IRS all the taxes due from them for the past year. Paying the right amount is no easy task. In my opinion, tax rates are way too high, and the tax code's an endless maze only an accountant or an attorney could love. But we're not here today to talk about what folks owe the IRS. We're here to talk about what the IRS owes to them. What the nation's tax collector owes the taxpayer is efficient tax administration. That means tax filings as painless as possible. It means processing returns and issuing refunds in a timely manner. It means answering the phone when citizens call and answering the mail when they write. It means preventing fraud and safeguarding Americans' personal data. Unfortunately, assisting taxpayers hasn't been a priority of the last administration when they showered $80 billion in supplemental funding on the IRS, the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. They directed most of those funds to be used to hire an army of new auditors. Only about 1 in 10 of the Inflation Reduction Act dollars were earmarked for taxpayer service or information technology. 1 in 10 of that modernization. Even though National Taxpayer Advocate Aaron Collins wrote at the time that this was a no-brainer, that the areas that require improvement most urgently are taxpayer service and technology. Collins wrote that instead of hiring more auditors to do back-end audits after taxes are filed, the most efficient way to improve the compliance is by encouraging and helping taxpayers do the right thing on the front end. She was right. We don't need more tax auditors. That's why over the past few years, Congress clawed back from the IRS about 2/3 of that $80 billion in the Biden-era funds. In keeping with these rescissions, the Trump administration used a voluntary resignation program to restore the IRS to pre-2022 staffing levels. But in the interim, the agency took its eye off the ball. It got distracted by dreams of a vast new army of auditors that would massively raise the federal tax take. Now we're back to reality, and we need to stay there by keeping the IRS focused on operational improvements and tangibly improve the taxpayer's experience. Those improvements can't happen without overhauling the ancient information technology system the IRS relies on for nearly all its core functions, from return processing to customer service. The agency relies on no data system more than the individual master file, which Mr. Sepp, who is with us here today, has called the IRS's most essential tax processing application, containing data for about 1 billion taxpayers, both living and dead. It's more than 60 years old and the oldest computer system still in use by the by the federal government. The IRS needs to overhaul the individual master file and other dated systems that keep the agency in the dark ages. Of course, that includes revamping its case management computer system. IRS customer service representatives rely on these access tax filers' history, allowing them to answer questions and resolve complaints. This Congress and the White House partnered to make real progress on the tax policy side last year, enacting major tax cuts in the Working Families Tax Act, and the IRS chief recently said the agency has already processed more than 100 million tax returns this year. It's issued 70 million refunds, and these refunds are on average hundreds of dollars larger than a year ago. That's good news, but in terms of efficiency and customer friendliness, the IRS, I feel like, has a very long road to travel. Today, we're to discuss how it can get to that right destination. And with that, now do I yield to her, or do I, okay, at this time, I'll yield to my co-chair, as I like to call her, Ms. Stansberry.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Welcome to our witnesses today. It's really a pleasure to be here with you. Happy Tax Day. Probably said nobody ever, except for accountants out there, but here we are. And we're really fortunate to be here today to have a bipartisan hearing about how to modernize and improve the IRS. And we're very fortunate to have a panel of experts here before us. And while we don't agree on everything, I know that the chairman and I have committed to a common goal of ensuring that everyone in our communities has a government that works for them and delivers the best possible service. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to partner on many of these issues. But we can't talk about taxes without being honest about how broken the system is. And that's not just the system that processes American taxes, but also the tax system itself, which is deeply unfair, deeply unequal, and deeply causing greater economic inequality in our country. With regards to the tax system itself, we can't ignore that over the last year during the current administration, and especially through the efforts of DOGE, which gutted the IRS and many of its affiliated organizations, that we have seen a system that has been further broken and dismantled. Key IRS functions were dismantled, staff were pushed out, and inexperienced political actors were put in charge of critical activities that are essential to the United States' functioning and fiscal security. Engineering work was paused, modernization efforts, which had been years in the planning, were canceled, and Americans were left with an agency that was barely able to process basic questions and service. And most disturbingly, which I hear about often in my district, is that we have seen reports of reckless data access that was granted to tech bros and to young people who probably shouldn't have access to those systems, raising serious concerns about Americans' most sensitive personal data, how it was mishandled, whether it was downloaded, and whether or not it was given over to tech bros and cyber companies that are using it for their own purposes. At the same time, the tax code itself is fundamentally broken. I don't think I have to tell anyone in this room, but a nurse or a teacher should not be paying higher taxes than a billionaire. Can we agree on something as fundamental as that? But as we are sitting here this week, my colleagues across the aisle are advancing a resolution this week to rebrand and to celebrate the one big beautiful bill, the big ugly bill, as I've been calling it, which further created inequality in the tax system. It gave wealthy households over $13,000 a year in additional tax breaks while cutting food assistance, medical coverage, educational assistance, and increasing taxes on the lowest income tax bracket in the United States. And I have personally asked my friends and family and others in my orbit whether any of them can point to a single decrease in their taxes, and I have yet to find anyone that can. In fact, the only tax reductions that anyone I know has had was because of state tax reductions in New Mexico, where we have made the decision to not fund forever wars, to not give away tax breaks to billionaires, but to use our taxes to invest in education, in healthcare, in food assistance, and the welfare and well-being of our people. And that is what the American people want. They want a fair tax code, a fair shake, and they want to see their taxpayer dollars being put to some good, not being wasted on forever wars as we're seeing currently. Now, every year, my office receives hundreds of calls from constituents who are seeking to have assistance regarding the federal government, and IRS happens to be one of the top 3 calls that we get. We've gotten calls from a constituent who couldn't reach a single IRS representative to find out if they actually owed the thousands of dollars that they received a bill on. Another constituent who just needed a simple transcript to apply for housing assistance, and they couldn't even get a call back. We have small business owners who have filed amended returns who heard nothing over a year, no updates, no guidance, no way to check what was going on, that put their businesses in peril. And we have seniors coming to us constantly asking for help to understand confusing notices and things that they've received through the mail. So something is fundamentally wrong with the system. And I can tell you, in New Mexico, there is literally one case advocate holding it down for the entire New Mexico delegation. One. And I just want to shout her out right now as one of our federal workers. Her name is Janelle Rivera. And I know people love to attack the IRS, but let me just say this. It's our federal workers that are holding it down right now. And I absolutely want to say thank you to Ms. Rivera and to all of our federal workers who are doing their jobs, showing up in spite of this chaos and taking care of our communities. So as we move forward in this hearing, I want to make sure that we talk about real things we can do to modernize the IRS, to set clear timelines, to have measurable goals, to have accountability, and to make sure that our communities are taken care of. We need mobile-friendly tools so people can check on their refunds and upload documents and do it on their own and not have to spend hundreds and thousands of dollars paying others to do it. We need to fully staff these agencies so that they can answer the phones and answer simple questions and not do it on the backs of a few federal workers. And we need to bring back the direct file that we put in place in the last administration that made it possible for millions of Americans, especially low-income Americans, to file their taxes for free. What a concept. I mean, why did they dismantle that? And finally, we need to protect Americans' data, because what happened under DOGE and the stealing of American data and violations of data privacy is wrong and illegal. So there is a lot of work to be done to build a fair tax system, a system that is fair, functional, and focused on them, and that doesn't give handouts to the wealthy on the backs of the American people. And we deserve a federal government that actually serves the people, that answers its phones, processes paperwork, and treats our taxpayers with respect. So I look forward to working together to understand how we can do that, and I look forward to the statements of our witnesses today. Thank you very much.
Thank you to my co-chair, Ms. Stansberry. It's been a pleasure working with you. I just want to say that for the record. I know that doesn't help either one of us in our general elections, but I don't give a rip. I need to recognize our attendees, our guests. And first we have Dave Henchman. Now, if I mispronounce y'all's names, my name's Burchett, so you know ain't nobody ever gets that right. So Dave is the director of the Information Technology and Cybersecurity team at the U.S. Government Accountability Office, the GAO. I would have to write that on my hand so I could just remember the correct order there, sir. Thank you. Next, we have Pete Sepp. Is that right, Mr. Sepp? Right on. Mr. Sepp is the president of the National Taxpayers Union, and I know who you are. And lastly, we have Janet Holtzblatt. Man, it's 4 today I've gotten out of in my committee, so that's cool. You're the senior fellow at the Urban Brookings Tax Policy Center. You know, when I always hear fellow, I think of some dude, and so I think we need to figure that out. That's not accurate. You're just the senior person, I believe. How about that? How politically correct is that? Should we not say that? You don't want to say senior person? Okay. Well, senior fellow. All right. And I thank y'all for joining me, and I look forward to sharing your expertise. And let's see, so how do we want to do this? Refresh my memory, what are we doing? We go straight to questions, or we want each of them have an opening statement? Okay, sir, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Burchett, Ranking Member Stansberry, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting GAO to discuss our work on the Internal Revenue Service's efforts to modernize its information technology. IRS relies extensively on IT to annually collect trillions of dollars in taxes, distribute hundreds of billions of dollars in refunds, and help the American public meet its tax obligations. However, some of the technology that IRS relies on was first developed over 50 years ago and now requires modernization. To that end, IRS has been working to update its aging IT enterprise for decades and has spent tens of billions of dollars in doing so, including at least $6.6 billion just since 2020, and has plans to spend another $680 million next year. Despite this time and investment, IRS has not provided its oversight stakeholders with the date for when this modernization will be complete. For the past several decades, GAO has reported on the long-standing challenges across the federal government with IT investments that all too frequently fail or incur cost overruns and schedule slippages while contributing little to mission-related outcomes. The pervasiveness of this issues led us in 2015 to add an entry to our biannual high-risk list, highlighting how the government can improve the acquisition and management of critical IT. One key element of this high-risk area is the need for government agencies to strengthen the oversight and management of their IT portfolios. Our work has repeatedly shown that federal agencies need to, among other things, develop reliable IT project cost estimates and schedules, effectively manage IT project requirements, and better manage the technically capable workforce. Our years of work has shown that IRS historically struggles with these same challenges, as we have frequently reported on the agency's inaccurate IT project estimates, incomplete modernization plans, and gaps in their workforce planning. Recent changes to IRS's long-term plans have also cast uncertainty over what the agency's modernized end state will look like. However, for years, IRS's efforts were built around 23 functional programs. However, last year, IRS paused those 23 programs to reevaluate the agency's priorities. The agency has since launched a new modernization framework composed of a series of new initiatives, but has published very little information on its revised approach. As a result, the relationship of these new projects to both IRS's past works and to the agency's long-term plans is unclear. Our work has also highlighted challenges that impact workforce planning for IRS's modernization. Just last month, we reported on IRS's increasing adoption of artificial intelligence and the agency's plan to use this technology in part to improve operational efficiency. But we also found that recent significant staffing reductions led to skills gaps that could greatly impact IRS's ability to use artificial intelligence as planned, calling into question the reliability of IRS's artificial intelligence-related goals. Compounding this, IRS's strategic workforce planning is currently paused as the agency is waiting to develop an approach that will align to a new strategic plan being developed by Treasury, a plan initially expected in February but still not yet published. IRS's own plan, once developed, will need to include long-term strategies to achieve the agency's goals while also addressing recent workforce challenges. Otherwise, IRS will be hard-pressed to identify its future workforce needs and the strategies necessary to achieve its goals. To address these various issues, GAO has made over 40 recommendations to IRS in the past several years centered around better documenting the agency's modernization approach, its management of key technology, and workforce management plan. To IRS's credit, many of these recommendations have been implemented. However, over 20 remain open. As IRS moves forward with its modernization, it will be important for the agency to pay continued attention to our prior findings and recommendations, especially around the ideas of strategic IT alignment and well-documented modernization plans. Taking our past reporting into account will better position IRS to effectively deliver on its important mission and responsibilities while also continuing to manage the significant investment of time and resources required to modernize its aging IT enterprise. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement. Thank you again for the invitation to participate in today's roundtable.
Thank you, brother. Mr. Sepp.
Chairman Burchett, Ranking Member Stansbury, members of the subcommittee, I'm really honored to be here on behalf of National Taxpayers Union. I can think of no more appropriate place, really, to review the operations of the nation's tax collector, as the title of this gathering says, and no better format for a substantive, thoughtful discussion than this roundtable. We've got a lot to cover, and I hope we can do it. I'm not going to read all of these materials. The tax code at 4.26 million words probably rivals this. We don't have that much time, but I have the materials here to convey that NTU and all of the witnesses here have a great deal of products to offer to this subcommittee in your work on attempting to figure out better paths forward for the IRS management and oversight. Please utilize us as a resource. We communicate well with each other here. Janet, the next witness, served on the Taxpayers for IRS Transformation project that we engaged in. We've been involved in 6 separate legislative efforts at IRS reform. We were on a commission in 1996-97 to make restructuring recommendations for IRS. All of these recommendations and GAO's recommendations half of which remain unimplemented, should be at the top of the agenda of this committee. I know I passed out prior to this meeting some overviews of our materials, so I just wanted to cover a few of them as highlights for everyone in case you didn't have a chance to review them. In 2024, we published a report card on key areas of IRS transformation. That's taxpayer service, technology modernization, tax gap, and compliance. And just for this event, we updated the report card. I was looking through it and editing it up until this morning. And we are pleased to report some modest improvement, but there is still a long way to go on this road for an IRS that can truly deliver for taxpayers. In the taxpayer service area, we've upgraded from a C in 2024 to B-, owing to development of a new level of service metric, a commitment for better phone and online assistance. There's an expanded availability of forms and tools online, but we still, again, have a way to go in fully digitizing the forms that taxpayers can use. We have given a C to its modernization work. That's up from a D grade in 2024. One of the biggest factors in that is that there is now underway an application program interface, an API, that's going to be layered on top of that individual master file system. That was something that the chairman was kind enough to mention in his opening remarks. That could be a really important development in finally making progress on modernization, but we don't know much about the contract. It was announced 7 months ago. Congress is owed a progress report on how that's going. When it comes to compliance objectives, we've upgraded from a C to a C+, and that has a lot to do with some of the compliance initiatives that we feel are most important to taxpayers, giving good guidance on the front end so that audits on the back end are not as necessary. Those are absolutely vital developments, as are alternative dispute resolution and fast-track settlement pilots. Those are finally underway after really decades of ignoring how important those are. I would also like to point out that we've done some filing season analysis, and some of the interesting items appear to be that despite a very large reduction in IRS staff, some of the key metrics, like refund delivery, appear to be on time, and yet there is still a lot to discover about this filing season that we're not really going to know about for another month or so. One interest of ours is how are the services for follow-up to filing going to work? The practitioner phone hotline is going to be a key element in that. We have also put out a product regarding complexity in the tax system. You can't really discuss improvements at the IRS without discussing tax simplification. That's vital. And of course, a lot of that is Congress's job, admittedly, but there are many things that can be done in the executive branch as well. The IRS needs to do a better job of fulfilling its obligation to accurately report the paperwork burdens associated with various forms and instructions. We discovered that, incredibly, the IRS reports as zero paperwork burden many forms and instructions that it simply doesn't know what the burden is. NA is not zero, and yet the IRS is equating the two as the same. We have to improve on that. I would also remind members of the committee that there are managerial choices at IRS, prioritization, deprioritization, that can really dramatically affect how the agency modernizes itself. And we put out a report regarding caseloads in tax court that are the result of IRS decisions to prosecute cases involving really complex tax situations that should not be litigated with a 100% litigation and penalty strategy. I'd urge you to take a look at that. It's about conservation easements and captive insurance. They are clogging up the tax court. Recommendations: I would strongly urge the committee to take a look at the Taxpayer Assistance and Service Act, bipartisan legislation from the Senate Finance Committee that would fix many of these modernization issues. Also consider how this committee can explore the program assessment rating tool. That was an excellent process for evaluating program effectiveness back during the George W. Bush administration. The big recommendation I will make and close with is we must resurrect the IRS Oversight Board created in 1998 to provide a complementary oversight function to Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration, GAO, and Taxpayer Advocate. It was designed to give strategic guidance to the IRS while they were modernizing, making sure they focused on objectives. No one else can do that as effectively as the way the Oversight Board was structured to do. It's been dormant for 10 years. It could make a massive difference in the success of IRS transformation. I will close with one last plea for bipartisanship, and it's wonderful to hear from members saying that we need to take a workmanlike approach to fixing the IRS. It was the late, great John Lewis, member of Congress, Democrat, who said, even in the most difficult times, we can come together as a nation, as a people, and as a Congress to accomplish important things for the American people. He was speaking about the Taxpayer First Act of 2019, the last major IRS reform package. 7 years later, we are long overdue to complete the job that was begun there. It can begin with this committee and all of you. Let's do it right now. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Holtzblatt? Yeah, hit your button there, ma'am.
Okay. Chairman Burchett, Ranking Member Stansbury, and members of the subcommittee, thank you very much for having me here today to talk about the IRS's operations. My name is Janet Holtzblatt, and I am a senior fellow at the Urban Brookings Tax Policy Center, or TPC. We provide independent, timely, and accessible analysis to inform policy debates. The views I express today are my own and should not be attributed to TPC, the Urban Institute, Brookings Institution, their boards, and their funders. I came to TPC after spending over 3 decades as a career economist at the Treasury Department and then CBO. I learned a very important lesson from my experiences in government, and that lesson is that tax policy goals cannot be fully achieved unless the IRS can successfully administer them. From that perspective, I'd like to offer 3 major points today. The first is that persistent uncertainty about funding hinders efforts to transform the IRS into a 21st century tax administration agency. The second is that the 2025 reductions in staffing likely resulted this year in less assistance to taxpayers and delays in refunds for certain segments of the population. And then third, the cutbacks to enforcement likely will reduce audits, but it also will affect pre-filing services that the IRS provides through rules and regulations and such that actually help taxpayers understand the law before they file their tax returns. I'm going to first turn to the cuts in the IRS's resources over the past year. At the end of fiscal year 2025, only about $10 billion was left from the $80 billion budget boost provided under the Inflation Reduction Act. That funding was supposed to support a decade of long-term investments in technology, enforcement, and taxpayer services. However, Congress subsequently rescinded $53 billion of that funding. Second, the IRA funding was intended to supplement, not replace, supplement the annual appropriations, which is to be used to maintain the IRS's routine operations. However, since the enactment of IRA, the appropriations have been cut, forcing the IRS to divert IRA funds to cover the increase in cost of inflation that affects the cost of the goods they bought, the employees they pay. Third, the combination of incentives to leave the agency and attrition led to the departure of 19% of the IRS staff through the end of December, or through October, including the skilled tax lawyers, accountants, and computer scientists who are critical to the implementation of the IRA investments. And then fourthly, the enactment of last year's tax reconciliation bill further strained the IRS's resources, especially since several provisions, and most notably the deductions for tips and overtime, were effective from the beginning of 2025 and required quick turnover in terms of issuance of guidance and creation of new forms and instructions. The reduction in resources did not bode well for customer services this year, and the first warning signs of trouble emerged last summer when the IRS estimated that after all the staff reductions, all the staff departures, it had to hire 3,500 new customer service representatives to achieve its goal of answering 85% of telephone calls during the filing season. The IRS was only able to fill 2/3 of those jobs and then had to fill the remaining staffing gap by detailing staffers from other divisions, many of whom had had no experience with customer service. With an undertrained staff, the IRS then reduced its target for telephone responses from 85% to 70%. Staff reductions also likely led to delays for refunds, delays for people who filed on paper or had simple errors on their filed returns. Now, in the best of times, refund delays are going to occur due to the labor-intensive activities associated with processing paper returns and corresponding with taxpayers who made simple errors on returns. But when there are fewer steps, there are going to be longer delays. A new wrinkle this year has been a government-wide initiative to replace paper checks with electronic payments, such as direct deposits into bank accounts. Taxpayers can still get paper checks, but only after very long delays. Because low-income people are less likely to have bank accounts, they are also more prone to having their refund delayed this year. Now, reflecting concerns about falling audit rates and potential noncompliance, the largest share of the IRA funding, 58%, was dedicated to enforcement. At the time of enactment, CBO estimated that the IRA increases, especially bumping up the audit rates for high-income taxpayers and big businesses, would raise about $180 billion in gross over the 10-year period. The rescissions, however, crawled back 92% of the IRA enforcement funds. Now, a lot of our discussion about the IRA enforcement money focuses in on that audits. There's less recognition to the fact that the enforcement budget also covers things that we might consider to be services. As I mentioned before, giving guidance to taxpayers so they have clarity of the law, rules and regulations, paper letter rulings, programs for large businesses where they can get a position agreed to before they file their returns. Cutting the enforcement budget not only limits those services, but it also prevents the IRS from developing other programs that might be able to provide pre-filing assistance before the necessity of audits after the fact. In conclusion, ensuring high standards for customer service and enforcement has to be a priority so the IRS can administer a complicated tax system effectively and to meet the intentions of legislators. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll mix it up a little bit here. We'll start on my friends across the aisle. Mr. Walkinshaw, are you ready to ask first round of questions?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
And thank you to our witnesses for being here, and I appreciate the chairman's approach to the work of the subcommittee. I do have to, since this is my first time as a member of this subcommittee on DOGE, just share a few of my broad thoughts on DOGE, and I'll narrow down to the IRS. It's important for us to remember that the original estimates of taxpayer dollars that DOGE would save, $2 trillion. And when Elon Musk and his team went about their work dismantling federal agencies and programs, quickly became clear that that was an unrealistic goal, I think based on a lack of understanding of how the federal government functions, or maybe an intentional distortion. They created a wall of receipts. I think it's still up. It was last updated on January 1st, 2026. That wall of receipts claims $215 billion in DOGE savings, which is a lot less than $2 trillion. But even that $215 billion figure is false. The New York Times analyzed that the 13 top items on that list, the top 13 list of canceled contracts and grants, were all wrong, all incorrect. The two largest contracts that DOGE claimed that they had canceled saving money were still operating. Money was still going out the door. They were double counting, overstating the actual amount saved through contract cancellations. At the same time, thousands and thousands of hardworking, dedicated public servants, federal workers, including many of my constituents, were fired, pushed out, abused, had their service denigrated, sometimes illegally. As has been noted, DOGE employees accessed and shared thousands of Americans' confidential tax data with ICE. There have been major data breaches at the Social Security Administration and other agencies. I don't think in the history of the federal government that any project has ever promised so much and accomplished so little while doing incredible damage. We were told $2 trillion would be saved. Now they say $216 billion. Turns out the $216 billion is wrong, and real damage has been done. And the result is the taxpayers, we're talking about the IRS today, and the taxpayers are no longer getting the services from their government that they pay for because of the damage that's been done. With that, Ms. Holtzblatt, I just want to talk about the sharing of Americans' tax data and personal information. And traditionally, the IRS has been very careful about that because the implications it have for the credibility, the trust that people have in the IRS. DOGE and the administration have taken a different approach and started sharing that tax data in ways that it has never been shared. From your perspective, what does that do to the trust between taxpayers and the IRS? What kind of impact could that have?
It's really very important that taxpayers trust the system. They're handing over a lot of information and paying their taxes, and to the extent to which they worry that that information may be shared with others who don't have a right for that information, it makes them less weary, makes them more weary to provide the information, the correct information to the IRS that will ensure that taxes are paid correctly. And beyond that, if you undermine trust with the IRS, it does have effects throughout the government, because reducing trust in one agency so that it casts a spell of distrust across government agencies. I just want to add, too, that I can't speak to the specifics of the disclosure of information, but I've worked with tax data, I worked at the Treasury, I've worked at CBO, and I was a subcontractor in the past couple of years. We go through such training in terms of disclosure. We sit through hours of videos, read many materials. It is drowned into our heads as to the importance of the security of the data. And there is a culture within the IRS of standing up to those standards. People believe, I mean, the people I knew at Treasury, people I knew at the IRS and in other organizations who had their hands touching tax data, feel truly committed to maintaining the confidentiality of the tax data.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hinchman. I just want to talk about IT modernization, and all three of you have addressed this in different ways, but I think we all know that it is a key challenge, a recurring challenge at IRS. TIGTA documented DOGE reductions wiped out 40% of IRS's IT staff and 80% of the IT leadership. So 40% of the total IT staff and 80% of the people who have expertise, senior folks who know the challenges. If we strip away some of the personnel and the expertise needed to modernize, go through the difficult work of retiring the 300+ legacy IT systems at IRS, some of which are more than 60 years old, as GAO has noted many times, I think. Does it make that modernization work harder? Do we not need experienced IT professionals inside IRS to figure out how to modernize those legacy IT systems that are holding us back and, to Mr. Sepp's testimony, diminishing the quality of service that our taxpayers get?
It's very valid to point out that we need to have people with the right experience. In terms of workforce, my rule of thumb as an auditor is I will never tell an agency to hire someone or fire someone. Make sure you have the right people with the right skills in the right places. I would add that with the changes that IRS has gone through in the last year in terms of how they're approaching modernization, we don't really have good visibility into whether they have the right people. I'm not sure they've also done the workforce planning that you need to do to make sure you understand what your needs are, and then a gap analysis to figure out, do you have the right people in the right places? That's something that is coming, I think, in the next several months. There's a new IT strategic plan that IRS has said will come out this summer that we believe will include a lot of this information. We're also looking forward to further information about what their new IT modern initiatives are in terms of both from a budgetary and resource stance to really understand what their vision is for how they're going to get from here to whatever the modernized end state is.
Maybe just drilling down on that a little bit, TMF, you've spent a lot of time working on TMF and looking at TMF projects.
Technology Modernization Fund?
Yeah.
I've testified on that in the past. It hasn't been part of my portfolio recently. That's one of my colleagues.
Okay. If you want to defer that, you can. I'm just curious, sure. Has IRS been successful in putting together, because one of the challenges with TMF is the agency's got to put together a good application, a good project with a good application. And I'm concerned with the lack of senior IT leadership in the IRS right now. Do they have the capacity to put together a good project and a good application? Or are they missing out? Other agencies might benefit from that.
I would probably defer on that. I'd want to talk to my colleagues who's more up to date on the TMF than I am.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Burleson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sepp, I wanted to ask you about the burden that the overall cost for processing individual taxes and for corporations to comply to our tax code. In your latest report, you estimate that the average taxpayer spends about 12 hours and right at $300 for each family that's filing taxes. I thought that was interesting, but the total compliance burden exceeds, when you combine it, exceeds almost $500 billion to the United States. For the average American family, I think that every year, tax day, April 15th, is something they dread. And meeting that compliance, and it comes with a kind of a weight on their shoulders and a fear of, what if I get it wrong? Will I have the heavy hand of government come after me? This is all this system, there has to be a better way to do this. Have you researched what kind of process improvements that we might be able to do to lift the burden off of the individual taxpayers in this very convoluted process?
Oh, certainly. If you have a few hours, we could go on for quite a long time about this. But I would say, for one, the tax compliance burden is concentrated in several areas of the economy. We have, of course, the average to fill out a 1040 form for a typical household. But if you begin adding Schedule C burdens, in other words, small business filers or sole proprietorships, that begins to run the total number of paperwork burden hours and out-of-pocket costs way up. If you happen to be in a small or medium enterprise with employees, still more. A corporation, still more. The business tax compliance component of the income tax runs about 2/3 compared to 1/3 for individual income tax compliance burdens. And I'd just like to make the point that we often measure the efficiency of the tax system in terms of how much the IRS spends to collect a dollar of revenue. Well, that's not a proper measure because it doesn't account for all the money the private sector
Because
spends.
all the work is being placed onto the individuals.
That's right.
Onto the businesses.
That's right. We're the ones who are doing most of the work of the tax system, not the federal government itself. And so improving that would take a lot of effort. You can, of course, go systemic and create a totally new income tax, move to a consumed income tax. Those are huge systemic choices, but there are smaller changes you can make to help improve the complexity problem. One is a quadrennial simplification process. You could have volunteers from the practitioner community go through parts of the tax code every 4 years and say, this is no longer necessary, this is outdated, this conflicts with other sections of the law, why don't we modify it or get rid of it? That could start to drive more tax burdens down.
What did you
for
call that?
A quadrennial simplification process.
Okay.
This was actually proposed in the 1990s through the commission we served on for restructuring the IRS, never acted upon. The IRS could be made to report more regularly on sources of complexity in the tax code. That, in fact, is a provision in the Taxpayer Assistance and Service Act that I mentioned in my opening remarks. I think getting good numbers and getting focus on complex areas of the tax code would help us to get a handle on going through item by item and actually doing something rather than kind of thinking, well, we need a flat tax or back and forth over national sales tax. Those are great reforms in our opinion, but those are a long way off, and we need to start thinking about things we can do in the immediate or intermediate term.
You're seeing states recognize the impact of the tax the burden of processing and the paperwork process for collecting and remitting taxes. When you look at net migration across the United States, it's no wonder the states that are receiving a lot of people that are moving, or that people are moving to the states that have no income tax, states where they don't have to file a tax return, an individual return. These are the states, overwhelmingly that we have net positive migration. They're leaving the high tax states, but they're definitely, you have low tax states, but the states that have no burden whatsoever seems to be an appeal for a lot of Americans.
Yeah. I'd like to compliment the work of Andrew Wilford on our team for compiling those migration stats, Debbie Jennings, Damian Brady for some of the other items we've discussed. And the point here, I think, is not an ideological one, but a practical one, that by their very nature, income taxes require more complexity
Right.
to administer and to comply with than even a sales tax and likely property taxes. Businesses who have to administer sales tax might disagree, but when you have millions, tens of millions of people in a given state having to do calculations of income, sometimes using the federal AGI model as the starting point, other times not, that certainly adds to paperwork burdens. And people who move to states without income taxes find their lives a little less burdened with that compliance, even though they still have to do the federal return.
I used to be, and I still would support a fair tax, but it would have to come with an elimination of the income tax. Otherwise, I don't trust this town. They'd find a way to, to like Phoenix, bring it back. But the concept of really taxing consumption over income is one that I think has some economic merit, right? Because at the end of the day, you tax the things you want less of, and you throw money at things that you want more of. Well, if you're taxing productivity, if you're taxing labor, you're discouraging people from working. And the people that are impacted are the people that have a W-2. It's not the people that are living off of their stocks. It's the people that have the W-2 income. So the notion of replacing that with a consumption tax is enticing to me, because we should be, as a nation, encouraging savings as opposed to constant consumption. I mean, the United States the American population is a consumption-based population. We save generally more than other countries, but still, this is a concept that I've always been a fan of. What's happened recently with the advent of the use of tariffs, I think, is an interesting way of possibly making a shift in tax code, in that if we as a nation were to shift from having an income tax altogether and shifted towards instead a foreign consumption tax, which is basically a tariff, what would be necessary in tariffs to account for or completely eliminate the cost and the burden for individual Americans on collecting and remitting their income taxes?
Well, speaking only about tariffs, we would have some serious concerns that the burden would still be on American families, because the payers of tariffs are actually the companies that are located here that are doing the importing, and that in turn gets passed along. Now, the principle of a consumption-based tax, either a VAT, a retail sales tax, would have to be adjusted for some of the realities of how big a government do we want. I know that some estimates are as high as 25, even 30% for a sales tax rate to cover the current revenues. With tariffs, it would approach the impossible. You would have to have a much smaller government in order to fund it solely through tariffs and or excise taxes.
Don't ask me for a good time.
Yeah, the numbers just don't work. Now, you could, if you wanted to have an honest conversation about a more consumption-oriented tax system, there were alternatives developed in the 2000s that would shift some of the income tax base toward consumption and away from investment. You could look at those again. There are plenty of options to retain a degree of progressivity, have simplicity, and encourage economic growth if we're willing to really get down to the details and have a discussion about the fundamental future direction of the tax system. That's a big job, very big job. And ultimately, we may be forced to have that conversation from a tax system that is so badly sagging under the weight of its own complexity that only the fixes we make can be temporary, and we have to think of an entirely different system of taxation.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Burleson. Mr. Subramaniam. I get that right?
Yes, Subramaniam.
Subramanian. All right.
you.
I need to say it a little faster. Sorry, it's my southern dialect. You're recognized, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Today is tax day, as Americans know. The average American income is about $50,000 to $60,000, depending on who you ask. And the average American basically pays around 15 to 30% of their income in taxes. And so that's a big chunk of that $50,000 to $60,000. But then you look at what happened last year with the passage of the One Big Ugly Bill, and what we've done by keeping the corporate tax rate low and creating all these loopholes for the largest corporations. And now we see that the largest corporations basically pay nothing in taxes. Amazon paid 1.37% of their income in taxes. $77 billion was their income. Meta, 3.57% with $200 billion in income. Tesla paid 0% in taxes. And Disney paid negative 1.6% in taxes. We're paying Disney for what they're doing. And then Live Nation, negative 6.32%, while the average American is spending 15 to 30% of their income on taxes. This is what happened last year with the Big Ugly Bill. And we took all those taxpayer dollars away from healthcare, away from food assistance, away from programs that help everyday Americans, and we spent it on those tax breaks for the very largest corporations. So this is what makes people angry about Congress and about our policymaking in this Congress. So we need to fix that and we need to change that. But I'm not gonna hold you all accountable today for that. What I guess you're here to talk about IT modernization at the IRS. And so let's talk, because my staff has been working hard to try to get constituents their taxpayer dollars back and refunds especially. And they have a lot of questions that they need answered and want updates on what's happening. And so obviously my colleague from Virginia talked a lot about the staffing shortages created by all the firings that happened last year. And that's a huge problem. If you're trying to do IT modernization, you need IT people to help you do it. If you're trying to do AI and have AI tools to be able to find fraud, for instance, you need people who know AI or who are able to help run those systems. But there's a backlog of about 2 million returns, last I heard, but we're trying to help our constituents. And one of the systems that was put in place for the past year was basically one for congressional offices to be able to open cases with the IRS. Mr. Hinchman or Mr. Sepper or Ms. Holtzblatt, are you all aware of this system that was put in place?
Unfortunately, no, we're not.
Okay, so there's a portal that was actually implemented over the past year. And so before this portal, it was easy to see the IRS have backlogs of cases that congressional offices were bringing to them as well. And so they created a portal where they could log all of the congressional inquiries. And so this helped make that a more organized system. It helped us help our constituents get answers that they needed. And so since the portal was created, all the new cases have actually been pretty well managed, I would say. And so this has been a welcome addition, and we like this. Now, one of the problems is that the old cases, though, and we're talking about, I've got one business that is owed 2 or 3, it's a small business, but a couple $1 million in a tax return they're owed since 2021. And so just as an example, imagine them trying to run their business right now. They've been at it for years trying to get that tax return. And there's many other individuals waiting for their refunds. And so I wonder the old cases either have to be relogged into the new system, which takes a lot of time, or they're just sort of falling by the wayside. And so again, it sounds like we may not know much in this room about what's going on there, but I'm just generally, now that you know the issue, what could we do to help the people who were not new, or did not file a new complaint with our office?
So one challenge that the IRS has had is that over time, the systems have grown, and I call them Frankenstein. They're adding systems onto systems onto systems. I know less about the business master file, which is where business returns are managed, but the individual master file that the chairman mentioned, developed almost 60 years ago when we were sending Apollo missions to the moon, touches 600 different systems within IRS. And so you as a taxpayer, when you have a pending case and you call in, you get to a customer service rep, hopefully not without waiting too long, they have to log into multiple individual systems to see where your case is and how that's being managed. One of the major efforts that IRS had, both in terms of the previous modernization effort as well as the new ongoing ones, is to put in what they call an enterprise case management systems that will bring all of that information together so that when you call into a customer service rep, they can call up your individual file and tell you exactly what's going on with your case, where it's being processed, where it's being managed, what the status is. That's something that doesn't really exist right now, but that the agency is working hard to get at. And I think it sounds like the system that you guys have is a smaller version of what they'll be able to deploy, or what they hope to be deploying for the American taxpayers in general. As I mentioned earlier, we don't have any schedule with these new efforts right now, so I don't know when it's going to be deployed. But I do know that it is one of the active efforts they have right now.
And what would you say would be if we're going to fire or cut a lot of these folks we already have, I guess, IT leadership, IT experts, are you optimistic about the outlook for IT modernization at the IRS at this point?
I don't have a good answer for that because I don't know what the real status of that is. As I mentioned earlier, the important thing about workforce management, especially with the technically capable workforce, is to make sure you have the right people with the right skills in the right place. They have not, to the best of my knowledge, done that workforce analysis that needs to be done. There are some indications that's going to happen this year in conjunction with these new modernization initiatives. And so my next review that my team is going to be doing, that's one of the things that we'll be looking at.
Mr. Sepp, would you like to add anything?
There are several steps that Congress could take. One would be to ask hard questions and insist on full budget and staffing for the Taxpayer Advocate Service. As far as we can tell, there were reductions made of between 20 and 25% in the levels of staff there. TAS exists for when technology fails taxpayers and that they can get through to a real-life human being. Also, Congress had access to frontline technical staff at the IRS all the way up until the mid-2010s. You could directly consult with people who were implementing these kinds of portals and projects. The IRS discontinued that kind of access, and they simply reply by email or they route things through their public liaison. You should be able to communicate directly with those folks. Also, Taxpayer Assistance and Service Act, which I mentioned, creates a more robust dashboard for wait times, other level of service metrics that I think would be very helpful in understanding where the IRS needs to improve with these items. And there's a lot of room for improvement. One of my own staff told me very recently of a bizarre problem in obtaining a refund that if you are the primary person listed on the tax return and you go to either make a payment or make a refund claim, you have to be the one doing it, not the spouse or the joint filer. Otherwise, it gets caught up in the system and the IRS won't recognize the payment, even though you have two people filing on the return and swearing to its accuracy. Those are the kinds of things we need to be looking at on an everyday basis.
Ms. Holzblatt, would you like to add anything?
A lot of what I have to say is in agreement with my colleagues here.
Okay.
We certainly need to have a plan. We need to have milestones. We need to have oversight to ensure that those plans and targets are met. A more specific point is that we often talk about technology as being the answer. That technology can improve the provision of services and technology can improve the selection of audits and so forth. But what we miss in these discussions is the importance of people, the employees. You'll still need people to respond to the taxpayer once the system works more efficiently. And we also talk a great deal about AI and machine learning as ways to expedite both services and enforcement and like, but those can't rely just solely on computer scientists. They need to have the tax experts, the subject matter experts available to be able to, in example with machine learning, to teach the machines and to grade the results. So it's easy to, and everyone does it, we all do it, to say technology is the answer, but it's the supplement to the skills of the people at the IRS to be able to use those tools.
Thank you, and I'll just end by saying that the staffing shortages and reductions are going to cost our country anywhere from $600 to $800 billion over the years to come. So this needs to be rectified quickly, and Congress can do something about it. So I think we should. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thanks, Sarah. Chair Lady Stansberry, you're recognized, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Chairman Burchett. My question is really about how do we get to comprehensive restructuring and modernization, and does that legislation already exist? Has, as in, for example, with Social Security, there's been a number of bills put forward, both for restructuring the agency and for long-term solvency of the fund. I know that in this particular case, obviously, IT modernization is kind of its own kettle of fish. And as a former OMBer, I used to work at OMB, and in fact, I helped stand up the digital service during the Obama administration. I think, part of the challenge is also the way the government does contracting. You end up with a circa 1990 data system by the time you finish it, and it's already outdated. So there's a lot of structural reasons, but some of the restructuring and managerial changes, the oversight recommendations that you guys have, the staffing restructuring, the funding structure, rather than just having, different administrations come in and tinker with it and change it, have there been any comprehensive pieces of legislation that were bipartisan that have been put together? And if so, where are they? And if not, what would you recommend that we do as Congress to put something like that together? And what would be included in your dream bill? And maybe we go down the line.
You're giving me flashbacks to 1998, when last time Congress passed a major restructuring bill for the IRS.
And that's 30 years ago, people.
That's 30 years ago, and we can still discuss. Perhaps it's worked out now, but certainly the issue back then was the transition period, that you grouped people in different parts of the organizations, you moved people across the country, and there was a lot of disruption in the agency that might have cost some time in terms of the restructuring. I think one of the issues for any organization is stability, and to make the current organization work, that you don't want to have the disruptions that eat up time, but you want to make sure that people are doing their jobs, that you have people in the right places, and that there's communication across what once was a 100,000 people agency is now an 80,000 people agency. And having congressional oversight and oversight from other outsiders also hold the IRS to the fire, make sure that they are getting the job regardless of how they are organized.
So the answer is not just yes, but heck yes. There's lots, a whole volume of legislation that's bipartisan that could make a difference. I just got in my email about 2 hours ago, Senators Warner and Cassidy have reintroduced a bill. It's called the Improving IRS Customer Service Act. That would not only establish a dashboard to inform taxpayers of backlogs, but it would require the taxpayer advocate to regularly publish performance data, expand callback technology. A bill like this has been incorporated into the Taxpayer Assistance and Service Act that I spoke about in my opening statement. Parts of that act have already passed through the House and the Senate, including IRS Math Act to improve the content of math error notices, which confuse people greatly. That was Senator Warren and some Republican colleagues who embarked on that. With the IRS Oversight Board that I spoke about, the need to strengthen it, resurrect it, give guidance to the strategic planning of the IRS. That language was introduced by Senators Ben Cardin and Rob Portman before they retired in 2022. That is pre-flighted by Ledge Counsel. It's called the IRS Customer Service Transformation Act of 2022. It could be instantly taken up and put into the hearing process. It is not inconceivable that by the end of this session, we could make major gains by enacting this legislation. We're already doing it bit by bit. Let's do it comprehensively.
And I know the chairman is and the staff of the committee are also looking at the record and other things that have been introduced. But if you all would be willing to submit a list us even by email of legislation you think is good government, bipartisan legislation that doesn't make the tax code more complicated, but actually fixes the problem. And Mr. Hinchman?
So I'm an IT guy. I have far less of a policy perspective as my two colleagues. Right now in the appropriations, they do require IRS to report quarterly on their major IT investments. That report goes to both IRS and GAO. That report stopped for about a year. It restarted in January, which was our first glimpse into what it is that they're doing now. There needs to be richer reporting. I think that while the appropriation side is doing it, there's never too much oversight. And I think the authorizing side is very important as well, to ensure that we know where these tax dollars are going. IRS is such an important agency for all of our lives. We were talking to your counsel earlier, and IRS and SSA are the two agencies that we all interact with at some point, IRS and then SSA. And so to make sure that they're doing it right and that this revolutionary approach they're taking, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but we do need to make sure we understand what it is and what their end goal is so that we know that the tax dollars that we're investing in the agency are being as well spent as possible.
Well, I can certainly say as a former OMB examiner that I saw many a cycle in which both Democrats and Republicans appropriated dollars for IT modernization, and I could never find a website that was improved from the millions of taxpayer dollars that got spent on it. And so there is a mystery black hole in which IT money seems to go in with the federal government. And so any recommendations you have both for oversight and just improving how we do IT modernization for the federal government obviously is a major issue. And then if I might, obviously can I ask one more question? One of the top recommendations is simplifying the tax code, and other industrialized countries have more simplified tax codes. What would that take? I mean, the current tax code is thousands of pages long, right? Like, what kind of endeavor would simplifying the tax code require? And is anyone seriously considering that? Like, is that just a pie in the sky idea, or is that something that you see that the United States Congress, if it were functional, could take on?
Congress did it 1986.
Okay.
So we're going back even further in time. And that truly was a bipartisan, action.
We're going 40 years now.
40 years. There was a former official who remained nameless, who was reported to have said that taxpayers don't care about simplicity if it means getting more money back. And you can see that in terms of the proliferation of credits and deductions and various other actions. So it really has to be a conviction. I mean, we saw that in the 80s. It was a conviction of a few people who mobilized action toward tax reform. And it also needs to be convincing Americans to give up what they think is a tax preference and get in exchange perhaps a broader tax base and lower rates that might achieve the same result. Simplicity is possible, but there has to be commitment and education to do so.
So in other words, people would have to give up some exemption that they get.
They might have to give up a
Yeah.
deduction for overtime or for tips, both of which added a great deal of complexity this year. But, you know, lower rates and a broader base would be a simpler system.
And so for countries that have undertaken to simplify their system, or even the United States 40 years ago, what did the process look like? Does anyone know?
Well,
Yeah.
part of the process involved direct consultation with the practitioner community to the extent that those countries had a similar system to ours where you have to make returns and the like. Other system simplification was easier in places where you didn't have to file tax returns. The government simply sent you a bill. That's probably not a desirable system for our country or our culture. But systematizing simplification can be an important way of going about this rather than having to worry about a big grand bill that has to pass to tear out the system root and branch. 10 years ago, we made recommendations to the incoming administration transition team to do just this. You form the Quadrennial Simplification Commission that I mentioned to Mr. Burleson. You involve IRS frontline staff rather than their public relations staff in simplification efforts. You also get better paperwork burden estimates out of IRS, so you actually know the sources of complexity, and you think ahead to processes that encourage simplification, and you set aside the ideology. I know there's disagreement over One Big Beautiful Bill Act, but it's hard to disagree with the fact that full and immediate expensing for businesses did not simplify the system. It certainly did, and that will pay huge dividends over time as the need for complex depreciation schedules, which are kept almost exclusively for tax purposes in many cases, finally get to melt away. Those would be huge time and expense savings for businesses. Same for some of the changes to the small business provisions.
Again, I'm an IT guy. I'm not sure I have a view on the simplification of the tax code, but I certainly have colleagues who would be happy to chat with your staff about that if you'd like.
Great, thank you. And please do send us any recommendations that you have, especially ones that are broadly acknowledged as consensus in the practitioner and expert community. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair Lady. We've acknowledged everybody, so I'll go through mine. This is for Mr. Henchman. The Government Accountability Office listed two of the IRS's most critical information technology systems among the government's most outdated and in need of overhaul. The IRS mainframes are over 50 years old and run on more than 15 million lines of COBOL, a computer code that peaked in popularity in the 70s. I could actually remember it. The folks involved with building and maintaining these systems are mostly retired. When were these ancient IRS systems first targeted for upgrade, and why is the agency still forced to rely on them?
So the efforts to modernize IMF was first with a system called CADE, which is Customer Access Data Engine. That was something that happened in the aughts. It started in 2000, was abandoned in 2009. That effort was then replaced by something called CADE 2, which is, again, Customer Access Data Engine 2, and that effort was still ongoing. As I understand it, the job that they were tackling, as you pointed out, 15 million lines of code, with a system that touches 600 other IRS systems, means that when you upgrade that code and convert it to a modern format, you still have to make sure that it works with all those 600 systems. Unfortunately, one of the things that happened along the way is really losing a good understanding of why this progress was stalling, why the project was over budget. One of the things we found, and I won't bore people too much, in project management, you can baseline. You create, this is the cost, this is our schedule. Changes happen in IT project management, totally understandable. You run into unexpected obstacles, and so you need to change either your target schedule or your target cost. However, you have to maintain that relationship to the original baseline so that you understand this is how much we're over budget, this is how much we're over time. IRS was losing that information. Their rebaselining just created a new baseline and ignored the past. And so they lost track of the complexity, they lost track of the time being spent, and they lost track of the money being spent. And other than that, I don't have a great answer for why it's taken so long, but every member of Congress I've talked to has been extraordinarily frustrated by that.
So are we going to fix it or not?
That is one of their, I can't answer that. What I believe is the effort.
What's got to happen to make it fixed?
So the effort's underway. So this was one of their primary projects. Is one of the 23 modernization programs that I mentioned. Those were all paused, those were all shelved as I understand it. When I look at the list of IRS's new projects, which is 9 or 10 depending on which ones you look at, the project that I believe is the effort to replace the IMF is listed. They call it, it's modernizing the
Yeah, I'm not much into acronyms.
But I don't have any idea what the timelines are or what the cost is. That information hasn't been released yet.
Where I was in the state legislature, we started getting into computers, and it just seemed like every department, every new administration come in, and I always wondered whose brother-in-law was getting the contract, because it just seemed to never make much sense, and they didn't hook up. The computer systems didn't seem to hook up. I don't know if they have or not since then. I'm sure somebody else's brother-in-law is in charge of it now, so maybe they have. Okay, these systems contain some sensitive data of tens of millions of taxpayers, social security numbers, salary history, and more. Is that data at risk of being stolen until it's migrated to a newer, more secure digital platform?
From a basic cybersecurity perspective, I would say data is always at risk. It doesn't have to be an outsider with ill intent, it could be an insider. And I believe some of the recent information that was released was a contractor who had access. One of the things that IRS is working on is a technology that assumes distrust with the user, and so as the user moves through the system, they're constantly being challenged and having to be re-authenticated in terms of strengthening that. That is one of the initiatives they have going on right now. And certainly the new system will better ensure data protection as well.
The IRS customer service employees struggle to resolve inquiries because they can't bring up tax filers' entire history on their computer screen. Back in 2022, the IRS planned to resolve this by decommissioning the agency's 60 different case management systems, but the Treasury Inspector General recently found that the Biden administration failed to decommission a single one of these legacy systems. Do you know why the IRS backpedaled on this project?
I know that the system that was going to replace those, up until April when it was canceled, had invested over $600 million on that effort. However, my understanding is that project was canceled, and there is a replacement for that was started last year that's in process. And again, because the information has been released, I don't know the cost or schedule of that project.
Why we backed up on it. To what extent is the case management system responsible for the IRS's lack of responsivity to taxpayers?
It's integral. In the past, with all these disparate systems, if you call in, you get a customer service rep, they call up your file, well, they have to go to all these multiple different systems that they have to log in and out of to pull the information. There is no, what IRS calls single pane of glass, where they bring your entire tax user record together, where you can see the status of what's going on, you can see the past transactions, and give the caller the information they're looking for. This is what they hope to accomplish with the new enterprise case management system.
Okay, I'm afraid we're going to run out of time, but so we can get to these quicker. Mr. Sepp, would Inflation Reduction Act funds, which were used to hire army of auditors have been better directed towards taxpayer services or IT modernization?
Absolutely, they could have and should have when you have an enforcement-heavy strategy. And here again, the funding became such a goal that enforcement itself was an end rather than a means. What you want out of the tax system is compliance. Enforcement is one of the tools you can use to get compliance, but so is issuing good guidance, so is providing good customer service. In fact, we have not adequately studied, especially in the United States, the return on investment of those kinds of improvements for not only compliance, but voluntary compliance. Other countries, especially in Scandinavia, have, and I think their tax systems are more balanced as a result.
Let me follow up on that. Should Congress be keeping the IRS focused on improving its basic blocking and tackling, processing returns, answering the mail, and safeguarding data instead of hiring armies of auditors to go after taxpayers?
Well, you have to start with the basics, and that's the basics of a tax system that has good voluntary compliance. It's the same with virtually any laws. If you want compliance with the laws, making arrests or investigating people on the back end, that's the most expensive and difficult thing you can do. You rather want respect for the system up front, where the majority of people will comply voluntarily.
8 million items of correspondence from taxpayers piled up at the IRS are past due for response. How can Congress hold their feet to the fire and ensure it's meeting basic customer service performance metrics?
Well, certainly there again, the Taxpayer Advocate Service has a role in making sure that problems taxpayers have in getting a response from the IRS are able to be addressed by TAS when the bureaucracy fails them. I also think we need to have good clarity of guidance, again, so that the correspondence flow isn't as heavy in the first place. We also have to think about the fact that there is so much paperwork flowing through this system now. You know, we talk about that kind of correspondence burden. The number of information returns issued in our federal tax system will, in the space of a decade, exceed the number of people on the planet. We have to get a handle on that kind of paperwork.
It seems that identity theft is a growing problem, including for tax filers who have their Social Security numbers stolen and used to file fraudulent returns. It takes the IRS an average of 676 days to correct taxpayer accounts after they reported an identification theft. If people can't trust the IRS to protect their data or to help them resolve instances of ID theft, does that erode basic trust in the agency?
It absolutely does, especially when you consider it alongside how private sector companies resolve ID theft in far, far less time. Also, the taxpayer advocate cuts that time dramatically versus the rest of the IRS bureaucracy. We need the IRS Oversight Board resurrected so that the IRS gets input directly from the private sector about how to solve these problems.
Could it reduce voluntary compliance with the tax code?
Yes, it increases cynicism, and with cynicism comes non-compliance. People walk away.
All right, ma'am, I'll ask you this first. How can Congress improve the death master file? I have a constituent who takes care of his 40-year-old dependent son, came by my office the other day, and the IRS marked the dependent as deceased, and to remedy it, they had to send in paperwork and wait 22 weeks before the IRS could even consider fixing the mistake.
That's sad. That's very sad. Part of the issue there is ensuring that the data that comes from Social Security Administration, which is where the death master file comes from, is clean. At the back end, when it gets to the IRS, there is this reliance that works generally of being able to take the data from SSA and match it to the IRS, the tax returns, and get a correct answer that expedites, the process of verifying information. But the problem that then comes up with the IRS is the nature of correspondence. That the IRS will send a taxpayer a notice, saying, we have denied this, perhaps this is a math error, provide us with information. And the taxpayer first has to understand the notice, and then collect the information, then mail it to the IRS, and then somebody at the IRS has to open the mail and look at it. So part of that gets to the issue that has been addressed by legislation of improving the language of the notices. And the second is ensuring that you have sufficient staff, I keep coming back to that, of people who can open the mail. You don't want, the extreme case was during the pandemic when there weren't enough people in the offices to open mail and paperwork piled up. That was the extreme case. But it does always come back to making sure that you have sufficient staff to open the mail and to review the mail.
Is there legislation that we could be putting forward to fix this problem, you think?
There was the legislation that was enacted to improve the language on math error notices. And again, we've seen the funding cuts, we've seen the staff cuts in customer service. That is a problem. One thing that would be, it keeps coming back to one, legislation that was enacted and that they're working on to improve language, providing more sources of assistance to taxpayers. To keep coming back to Pete's point, the taxpayer advocate, ensuring that they have sufficient staff to go there and advocate for taxpayers and ease the process. But, ensuring that, there's good sources of communication between taxpayers and the IRS.
Yeah, there is also a bill to speed up and direct the IRS to use machine reading technologies to scan in correspondence more quickly and to actually make it meaningful and searchable, so that that should cut down on some of the bureaucratic processes. That's been introduced in the House and the Senate. So that would be very helpful. And there are other easy fixes to stop the pipeline of correspondence. Few people know this, but if you waited until today to file your tax return and you owe money, you're probably in non-compliance and you're going to get a penalty, because the system for accepting the filing and payment of tax requires you to actually file earlier so that the Treasury's electronic tax filing system recognizes it. You're better off throwing a check in the mail on April 15 if you owe money than trying to pay it today. You'll face penalties for it because of delays in the filing and payment system electronically. That's
That doesn't go on the postmark.
Yeah, and there is also the postmark problem, where the Postal Service last year said, well, a postmark isn't a postmark anymore at your post office. It's when it's going to a processing facility. That messes up the definition of timely filing. Congress can clarify these things instantly. There are, again, legislative proposals to fix this, and all we have to do is move them through the process.
All right, Mr. Hinchman.
The issue of the Death Master File, I think, as Janet talked about, the recent legislation giving Treasury permanent access to that, given time, I think will help resolve a lot of those issues. Certainly, we've testified on that incongruity that Treasury doesn't have access for a long time. And it's good to see that that legislation was enacted so that we can overcome that problem, because that's a common sense solution. But now we need to let the Treasury systems catch up to that so that they're including this information in a timely manner and helping to resolve some of the bottlenecks that both you described as well as my co-witnesses.
All right. I believe that's all the questions we have. We thank y'all so much for being here, and I'm kind of informal in all this, but if there's an issue that you think we can address legislatively, you think we can put a bill forward, the chair lady and I are working on bipartisan stuff, eliminating duplication, things like that. It's not sexy, but dadgummit, it's what we need to be doing. I was telling her, everybody wanted to be on this dadgum committee, you know, but we're not. She and I aren't up here
Until we started doing real work.
until we started doing real work. You're out of order. No. Until I told her, I said, you need to pick a fight with me and call me to fight you out in the parking lot. Maybe we get a crowd here and get the media covering this, because this is very important stuff, because I guarantee you people are aggravated right now across this country, and it is bipartisan. I don't care if you're what you are. If you're a mugwump, you're ticked off today for good reason. So please, if y'all have ideas for legislation, get with me or my staff. I want to hear about it. Dadgum, we can do something. Let's do it.
It's on the way.
All right. Thank y'all so much for being here, and I guess this party's over. Thank y'all.